What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Off the Bench. I'm Brandon Carney alongside Pat Gustafson. And Pat, I never want to intro a podcast like this because it's so generic, because people will always come on and be like, we got a heck of a show for you today, you know, blah, blah, blah. And like, nah, I say this, I do not say this lightly. We have a heck of a show for you today.
This is definitely our most robust show that we've had in the few months we've done this. Not even close.
There's a lot going into this one. I mean, look, let alone we have the whole running back debacle. It feels like there's going to be a fucking union formed and a strike soon for this entire position. We have DeAndre Hopkins finally having a team that he can call his own. More importantly, it is the final installment of our fantasy football preview series with the NFC South. And, you know, some of you, honestly, probably none of you are wondering why it's significant. I'm like, you know, it's such a bad division. You're probably thinking, why? No, you guys know exactly why the NFC South is significant for this podcast as Pat shows off his Raiders Derek Carr jersey, a new member of the NFC South. You all know how Kyle Pitts has factored into my life over the past year or so.
Rent-free.
Bro, I'm paying him rent to stay in my head. It's honestly, I've paid him blood, sweat, and tears in fantasy, and he doesn't even know I exist. So we'll be talking about Kyle Pitts here in a little bit and how I feel about him this year. Look, I am going to try to throw water under the bridge and give an objective take on what he's going to do this year. I don't own him anymore. I'm not in a dynasty league where I have Kyle Pitts. So look, clean slate, fresh start. But I'll be honest with you, Pat, it's not really a favorable evaluation.
I wasn't expecting that, and despite your objective view, like you know, bad blood's gonna be bad blood.
Here's the thing. I'm not letting it cloud my judgment, but I'm definitely going to have more of a good time slandering him than I would if I just hadn't been scorned by him in the past as well. So, you know, there might be a little heat behind my words here. But let's start this off, Pat. The biggest news of the week. Look, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and Tony Pollard did not reach long-term deals after being franchise tagged. The only player who was franchise tagged who reached a long-term deal was a tight end. It was Evan Engram, and that's obviously not a coincidence. We've reached a really interesting boiling point here with the running back position. So none of those guys got long-term deals. Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones had to take pay cuts. You've got Dalvin Cook here still sitting in free agency. Even Ezekiel Elliott, who obviously, you know, has less in the tank probably than Dalvin Cook, but is a guy who should still be on a roster at some point. This position is tanking right now, and it's really, really interesting to see where things are going to go. I feel like things were kind of sparked by the Le'Veon Bell holdout a few years ago and how that just went so poorly for him. I mean, look, did he get his money? Yeah. Did he get all of it? No, because he got cut before the end of his deal, which that's just kind of how it goes. But he did get a decent amount of money, but it accelerated the end of his career. And he himself now is recently saying, you know, he regrets basically entirely how that went down. Pat, well, how do you feel about this? And what was your reaction to none of these guys getting long-term deals as of yesterday?
I understand the frustration on their part, because at the end of the day, these three in particular have proven to be workhorse backs who have strong value to the team. But on the other hand, I think I've made it very clear that just running backs don't matter that much in the grand scheme of everything. I mean, obviously it's great to have a good running back, but I think the thing now is just that these teams and front offices realize that if you have a good scheme and a good offensive line, you could put just about anybody into that position and succeed. You know, like Le'Veon Bell's another great example. Like, you look at him when in that year with the Jets where it really just tanked his whole career. He was a good running back who got paid to play in a terrible Adam Gase scheme behind a bad offensive line, and it effectively tanked his career. So it's funny how Le'Veon Bell's probably going to come up multiple times in this discussion, but excuse me. But yeah, I think that's the big thing where it's just like, I feel like we're almost going to reach a stalemate here where there's a problem, but there's no plausible solution.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing, Pat. The solutions are solutions that I've kind of been preaching and putting out there for a couple of years now, but they're solutions that do not benefit the owners whatsoever, and they'd be the ones that would have to vote on it. That's why, like, I joke about the strike concept, but it's almost like that's the only way things would get done here, because this is a complete one-sided affair between the running backs and the owners, where the owners have all of the leverage, all of the power, to where they don't have to. Why would they change anything just to make the running backs happy when it's not in the best interest of their pockets? The only ways to really change things are to either make running back rookie contracts shorter so that they're not getting paid peanuts before they're able to get a new deal, or change the franchise tag rules, or both. I mean, you could do both things, but with the franchise tag, like, I think people. One thing I want to make very clear is the Le'Veon Bell situation and, let's say, just Saquon Barkley, to narrow it down to one guy, are very, very different situations. So when Le'Veon Bell held out, that was his second time getting franchise tagged. That meant,
which is ridiculous.
That was his second time getting franchise tagged. Now, in general, the first tag and the second tag are not that different. The second tag will cost a team about $2 million more than the first tag will, but in essence, it's the same. Le'Veon Bell knew that he was not going to get tagged a third time because the price goes up astronomically to a point where you are not going to pay that to a running back even for 1 year. Saquon, this is his first time getting franchise tagged, so he has almost no benefit to sit out, because if the Giants are willing to pay him $10 million this year, you can bet they're probably willing to pay him $12 million next year, because it's still less than what he was asking for and what they were willing to actually pay annually, if you believe the reports that come out. So Saquon, sure, let's say he sits out this year. That means he's not getting any money. And then next year he just gets tagged again for 12 mil, and it's like, well, why didn't I just play? The only thing you could say is so he doesn't get hurt, but like, what's the difference at this point? It's not the same thing. Le'Veon Bell knew he was going to hit free agency. I don't think that's necessarily as clear for Saquon Barkley. So it's a really tricky situation for these players. And Pat, we have a lot of running backs actually speaking out, a bunch of them on Twitter, some big name guys coming out, even if they're not, looking for a new deal. Derrick Henry saying, at this point, just take the running back position out of the game. The ones that want to be great and work as hard as they can to give their all to an organization just seems like it doesn't even matter. I'm with every running back that's fighting to get what they deserve. You have Jonathan Taylor, who hasn't been paid yet, saying, if you're good enough, they'll find you. If you work hard enough, you'll succeed. If you succeed, you boost the organization, and then doesn't matter. You're a running back. Yep. Austin Eckler tweeting, this is the kind of trash that has artificially devalued one of the most important positions in the game. Everyone knows it's tough to win without a top running back, and yet they act like we are discardable widgets. I support any running back doing whatever it takes to get his bag. Christian McCaffrey saying this is criminal. Najee Harris saying, they set the tone for every game, and the notion that they deserve less is a joke. And then, of course, Saquon just saying it is what it is.
I will openly disagree with something that Austin Eckler said.
I was going to say, I figured you would.
It's proven that teams need an elite running back. Like, no. Like, actively no. Like, you look at these teams. I pulled it up here. The last 3 Super Bowls, none of these teams were paying their running back more than $2 million. Or, in the range of $2 million for that season. And it was Leonard Fournette for the Bucs in 2020. But you look at the Chiefs last year, you just think about it. Isaiah Pacheco is making $725,000 as a 7th-round pick, while Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's making almost $2 million as a first-rounder, is a healthy scratch. Mm-hmm. So, you just look at, back and forth, like the Eagles, Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, Kenneth Gainwell. You look back to 2021. Joe Mixon is the exception. Joe Mixon was making $8 million. We'll talk about him in a little bit, too. But outside of Joe Mixon, Sony Michel, Cam Akers, CEH, Darrell Williams. Like, if you have the right scheme in right offensive line, just about anybody can work. And it's not to say that these guys aren't valuable pieces. They're great players. They're at the top of their positions for a reason. It's just a shame that we are in an environment where these guys get so beat up. I'd argue no one gets beat up the way running backs do, that their peak is basically 26 years old, and then they're done. Right. And it's just a super unfortunate situation, because at the end of the day, like, the owners are right to not want to pay these guys this much money. But it's frustrating from the fact that, some of the brighter stars in the league here still aren't getting what conceivably they'd be worth, especially if they played another position.
And the thing to me, Pat, is that it's not necessarily that elite running backs can't help a team get to a Super Bowl, even though we've seen the evidence of all these Super Bowl teams not having elite running backs. It's just that when it comes time to pay these guys, like there's no reason to. So that's why they don't end up on these championship rosters, because they're not on any roster for all that long. They play out their rookie deal, they get franchised once or twice, and that's it. But what happens is, you mentioned the shortness of their careers. It's like, okay, let's say you get through your rookie deal and then you get franchise tagged twice. Okay, you've been in the NFL for 6 or 7 years at that point. And then it's like, even if you are still good, teams and ownership are going to bet that you've only got 1, maybe 2 years ahead of you, and they're not going to. They'd rather miss out on those 2 years of you continuing to be elite than get locked in to 4 years of paying you $15-16 million. That's just how it is. So again, I firmly believe that like rookie deals for running backs need to be shorter, also largely because whether a running back is good basically after their rookie year. Like it's the quickest transition to the NFL out of any position. Sure. It's the smoothest one. So there's something that needs to be done here. I think we're reaching a boiling point. I don't know how or what's going to happen, but like I don't know. Unionize, guys. Get out there, strike it up, but get the picket signs out there.
But here's the problem: if they strike, it's not going to end well, because then the owners are just going to say like, all right, well, we'll use these other running backs, and it won't be that bad. Obviously, it won't be to the level of these top guys, but like it may even prove the owners' points more. And I think the biggest obstacle you mentioned also the rookie contract length. Obviously, the owners probably wouldn't agree with that, but I'd argue the Players Association wouldn't go for that either, because obviously less years, less money. Less guaranteed money unless you raise the guarantees. But then the owners would hammer that down immediately too. So in theory, it's a good idea. Let these guys get to free agency, maybe a little bit before their window is ending, quote unquote. But I just don't see how that can happen. And I think just somewhat of a side, the franchise tag is just fucking stupid. I mean, regardless of the running back, like. Man. The MLB has nothing to speak of. The MLB, you can give a guy a qualifying offer and you'll get a compensatory late first-round draft pick. That's fine. It does hurt the player's value, but whatever. The NBA has restricted free agency, which the NFL has too, A team offers a guy an offer sheet. The team can match it. The team can say, go to the other team. Why does there need to be something more? There's just no need for a franchise tag in any sense, and I think that's the biggest thing. Like we're not talking about this conversation with running back value nearly as much if it weren't for this stupid franchise tag.
Yeah, and it's like this tag, in theory exists as a compromise between, okay, we're going to give you a good amount of money, but it's only locked in for a year. The problem is when you have a guy who, if he was on the open market, was going to get more than this annually, then there's no point. Like, I think if you were to raise the price of the franchise tag for the first year and second year, then maybe we, again, wouldn't be having this conversation, because are they going to tag Saquon Barkley if it's going to cost him $15 million to do it? Probably not. Or they would at least try to work something out multi-year, because if they're like, okay, if we have to pay you $15 million for 1 year, you're worth that over the next few, because you won't be dust in the next 3 years, we don't think, because Saquon's still a young guy. So I agree with you. I think the franchise tag is a very, very strange mechanism that we've just kind of come to accept here in the NFL, and it doesn't really. It's just not
necessary. Good. Like if you want something to kind of protect the team, I think the restricted free agent model with the offer sheet is a great model. And it's very strategic. Other teams can kind of corner, the incumbent team to say, hey, overpay this guy, or we're going to overpay for him. We don't care, but we know you care. But I think at the end of the day, as I kind of said right at the beginning, I don't think there's any immediate solution that would, or even compromise, that would please both the players and ownership. So I just think this is a problem that is going to persist. And obviously we'll either find out, we'll get more and more evidence, more and more data. Do these running backs fall off earlier? And honestly, I think it's only going to get worse, let alone not get fixed. I think this problem is only going to get worse.
Who would have thought that the NFL would go the same way of fantasy football leagues, just gradually caring less and less about running backs and, lifting up kind of the wide receivers or really any other position that you'd rather invest in instead. Can't say that for us, Pat. We're non-PPR. The running backs still matter. Yeah. But in general, those out there with I want to call those standard leagues now. PPR is really the standard.
It is, yeah. PPR is
in those leagues, that's where, running backs are getting devalued. So, look, something's going to happen here over the next few years. I don't know what it's going to be, but I feel like something's got to change here. Don't know what it is, but it sucks that these guys who are very, very fun to watch. Look, I'd much rather watch Saquon Barkley tote the rock for the Giants than fucking Matt Breida.
Well, that's my next question is like, say him and Josh Jacobs really follow through with it. Like, there's no way that the Giants could be confident in Matt Breida or the Raiders could be confident in Zamir White. Again, they still won't, as I'm sitting here saying, like, oh, the running back position doesn't matter as much, but they still won't produce as much as those guys. Is this Dalvin Cook sitting here licking his chops? Or these guys like Zeke and Kareem Hunt? Is this going to be their opportunity? I personally think they're both going to play, just because I think they'd basically be committing career seppuku if they did not do that. Like
they don't have anything to gain by sitting out, except for, yes, they'll stay healthy, but for what? To get tagged again next offseason. It doesn't. There's no reason. So I think maybe it's a game of chicken where they sit out a game or two, try to get traded. I don't know what it's going to be.
This is also entirely the Raiders' fault, as they declined Josh Jacobs' option. Like, they would have just simply had Josh Jacobs. They declined his fifth-year option because McDaniels didn't know. He didn't want to commit to any of those 3 Gruden first-round draft picks. Hello, Clellan Ferrell and Jonathan Abram. So they didn't want to commit. So they did this to themselves. They put themselves in this position where they can now be without their second-best player on the whole team. Max Crosby, their third-best player on the whole team.
Yeah, a disaster overall. All we know right now is that Tony Pollard is expected to play on his tag, and Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley are very much TBD.
And to be honest, $10 million is very fair for Tony Pollard, because obviously,
a guy who's never had that role before.
Exactly. We've talked about how good he was last year and how good we think he's going to be this upcoming year, but at the end of the day, he doesn't quite have the pedigree of Josh Jacobs, and then Saquon is even above Jacobs. So it makes sense from Pollard's standpoint to do that. But I get Jacobs and Saquon at the least wanting to voice their displeasure with the situation.
I'll be curious to see how this all plays out for a guy like Bijan Robinson in 4 years. Fast forward me 4 or 5 years and see where we're at with another potentially generational talent. Guy we'll actually talk about a little later in the show here. As you see, those of you watching on YouTube got my Falcons jersey here. Yes, it's a Kyle Pitts jersey. Leave me alone. All right, Pat, let's move on here. DeAndre Hopkins, a guy we've been monitoring basically all offseason. We really only ever had 2 contenders this whole time for his services. It was the New England Patriots and the Tennessee Titans. As I sit here depressed and have to admit he has gone to the Tennessee Titans. The Vegas odds jumped by like $1 billion, and then the next day
minus like 1,600 or something stupid.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, this is
next day he immediately goes to the Titans. Are you surprised at this choice, Pat? Or I mean, we've only really heard it again about 2 teams the whole process. So I guess
that's the thing, is that I didn't think either of these teams were particularly great fits. Obviously, they needed a wide receiver, but from what he was talking about, like, he wants to play with a good quarterback, stable organization, good defense. Okay, I mean, the Titans, good defense. Mike Vrabel's a good defensive head coach. Ryan Tannehill, the definition of at this point, but still
at least
passive.
Loves the game, though. That was the way he worded it.
Oh, loves the game. Yeah, I mean, I don't know Ryan Tannehill personally, but Ryan Tannehill is a passable quarterback at this point in his career, and then a stable organization. I mean, I guess they have a new GM this year, but I mean, that shit happens. But
sure,
they were both very uninspiring landing spots, considering teams like Kansas City and Buffalo, and even the Jets might have been a better fit on paper. I don't think it does much for the Titans in terms of their outlook this season, because of, one, how good the Jaguars are going to be and how competitive that AFC wild card hunt is going to be. I expected them to probably be a 7, maybe 8-win team at best. I don't see this doing much for that outlook.
I think it's funny, DeAndre Hopkins, just to get his perspective for a second. The team that he picked and the situation he picked tells me that it was a very self-centered. He's not ring chasing. What I see from DeAndre Hopkins going to the Titans is that he loves being the number 1 guy on a team.
Yep.
And he wanted to get paid. He is not remotely ring chasing. This is like purely those 2 things. And I think people don't often think about the I want to be the top guy aspect of it, especially when he's that age. But it's like, even if he went to the Chiefs, Travis Kelce's the top guy. Yeah, he'd be the top receiver, but he's probably not the top target getter. Patriots, yes, he'd definitely be the top guy, but again, that offense is probably going to be pretty run heavy. Mac Jones is going to spread it around regardless. Now he goes to a team with no receivers to speak of. I mean, yes, maybe Treylon Burks takes a little step forward here, but from what we've seen, he's a big question mark. Kyle Phillips, I think, is the guy after that. Then we've got Chig Okonkwo in tight end.
Racy McMath, I believe, is still in that wide receiver room.
Racy McMath. I mean, is Kenny Britt still hanging around? I don't know. But yeah, I agree with you, Pat. It doesn't change much for the Titans to shift gears to their perspective a little bit. The only thing I think it might do is let Derrick Henry breathe a little bit more. The box won't be quite as stacked with defenses knowing there's an actual receiver on the other side. One thing I do want to mention, too, is I keep seeing people say the Titans are like this receiver graveyard because of Andre Johnson and Julio Jones, Randy Moss. And I just want to say, like, all those guys were cooked before they got there.
Oh, my God.
DeAndre Hopkins has a year or two of, I think, relatively high-end production left. It's not as easy as fitting him into that little puzzle of those guys. I know it's a funny comparison to make, but, like,
that's what people do on the internet. Yeah.
I would be shocked if DeAndre Hopkins, if he ends up being fully healthy this year, if he's not a 1,000-yard guy again. Like, that would be a big shock, whereas those other guys were dust.
Yeah, and again, just from the perspective where he produced reasonably well last year when he was on the field for Arizona in a really bad team, and this is going to be a better team. But again, I think, like you said, he's doing this for himself. I'm shocked he signed a 2-year deal. I thought this was kind of going to be like a 1-year, make decent money, prove it, and then really set yourself up for another decent contract coming out of this. So the fact that he signed for 2 years was the most surprising aspect for me. But yeah, I'm devastated for Treylon Burks and Chig Okonkwo. Those are two guys that I have talked a lot about, including having borderline sexual thoughts about Chig Okonkwo. But this, sadly, I don't want to say tanks their value.
It kind of tanks their value.
But they still have some value. But Okonkwo is no longer a tight end one in my eyes. No, and Burks, I still think Burks has a lot of upside. He's really an upside guy, but the chances of that happening have greatly decreased as well.
You just look at a team like the Titans that is going to run it down your throats, and then when they don't, they're going to throw to DeAndre Hopkins. How much room is there for you to invest in a secondary pass catcher? Yes, like there's going to be spike weeks and such, but it's just Chig Okonkwo, half of his appeal was that he could have literally been the Titans' top pass catcher, and now that's completely out of the question. It's a bummer. I wanted Chig as well, but now I guess I'll have to turn my attention to some of these other late-round tight ends. Pat, DeAndre Hopkins himself, how are you viewing him for fantasy football? Where would you be comfortable taking him or seeing him on your roster? Wide receiver 2, flex?
I would say maybe a very, very, the very low end of wide receiver 2. I think he's more of a flex option, just because I don't think we know what to expect here because.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen A.J. Brown flourish in this offense, in a similar offense. Granted, it was Arthur Smith's back then, but we've seen an alpha wide receiver flourish in this kind of situation. But they were just so run-heavy last year and just so reliant on Derrick Henry. And I still think that offense probably runs through Derrick Henry.
Sure.
More so than anything. So, it's a situation where, I like the floor more than the ceiling. I think he's got a solid floor. I think, like you said, 1,000 yards is certainly a very, very reasonable expectation. I don't love him. He's, everyone has a value, as we'll talk about later. But, He's certainly not a guy that is going to be jumping off my draft board at me and say, you've got to take this guy.
Yeah, I think he's going to get peppered with targets. Obviously, we just talked about how, you and I are basically in the Titans receiving room behind DeAndre Hopkins. But I think you look at the guys he's probably going to get drafted around. So I have some ESPN PPR rankings in my hand that I printed, I think, last week. But this was when Hopkins was still a free agent. I'm assuming that him at least signing with a team will bump him up a couple spots. Assuming that's the case, I mean, he's going to be drafted around guys like Deontay Johnson, Christian Watson, Chris Godwin, Keenan Allen. And I mean, I get the argument for a guy like Hopkins who's been at that elite level before. To me, Pat, I'm just not super in love with a guy at this age.
I think I like everyone else you just listed better. Albeit close. Sure. But again, if it comes down to that round 5, 6 where I'm looking at those guys, Hopkins does not inspire me as much as some of those other picks.
I've always been this way in fantasy football. Much like GM's and ownership's perspective on running backs that we just talked about, I'd rather get off the boat a year early than a year late. I don't want to spend a pick on DeAndre Hopkins as my wide receiver 2, only to find out that this is the year he's washed up.
Yeah.
Am I jumping off too early? I very well may be. I mean, he was on pace for some good numbers last year in Arizona with, quarterback play that was all over the place. But it's just not a pick I'd feel great about. I'd much rather invest in, honestly, a second-year leap from a guy like Christian Watson or a bounce back from a guy like Deontay Johnson than I would in just hoping that Hopkins keeps the floor that we've seen his whole career in an offense that's not going to throw it all that much.
Exactly. I think that's the biggest thing. That's why either New England or Tennessee, they weren't.
I didn't want him if he went
options.
to the Patriots either. I wanted him on the Patriots for my own interest. I didn't for fantasy. I wouldn't touch him. I'm not touching any Patriots for fantasy football. It's just a gross situation.
But yeah, I don't see it being like this kind of situation where, and the name value is going to honestly help, because I think a lot of people in your leagues aren't that into fantasy football. They see DeAndre Hopkins, they're probably going to take him over some guys that he probably should go over. So, honestly, I'm going to let that happen.
Absolutely. 100% letting that happen. Pat, just want to touch on this real quick. So the Madden ratings have been released. I dropped a video on this today. There's look, I think Madden ratings at this point are intentionally just trying to get people angry so that they will talk about the game. I think one of the most egregious ones I saw today was TJ Watt is a 94. Which is like the 6th best defensive end, and Aaron Donald's a 99, even though he didn't play that much last year. I don't know. I just want to let the people know Madden ratings are coming out, so keep track of those if that's something you're interested in. In general, I don't.
Very stupid.
Dude, they're so dumb. I made a video on it today to make fun of them, but Jamar Chase, he's a 94 now, whereas Jefferson's a 99. It's I know Jefferson's he's not 5 points better. And then you got Christian Watson, who's a 77, which is literally below Jackson Smith-Njigba, who they gave a 78. And I'm I understand JSN may be the better NFL receiver eventually, but Watson was pretty good last year in his limited action. I don't know. Madden ratings are just
exactly.
irritating.
As someone that hasn't owned a Madden game in close to 10 years, I only have what I hear about on the internet, and it seems like the game just kind of fucking sucks now.
It's really bad.
That's the kind of the essence I've gotten. So it just seems like these ratings are just kind of a grab for attention, and it works. Even the players, or, you see guys like Sauce Gardner, Justin Jefferson tweeting oh, this is an incredible honor, and these other guys being pissed. They are getting the publicity that they want through this. I personally could not care less.
That's the thing. It's still an iconic title from the days when it was a good game that these players, grew up playing it. And like Justin Jefferson said, he used to make himself in Madden and would make himself a 99 when he was a kid. And now that's a dream realized that he actually totally get that, sympathize with that 1,000%. But it's just to us now, it's the game's ass, man. It's just ass. I look, maybe this year will be different, but I feel like that's what we've been saying since Madden 12, which I think was the last good Madden. All I remember about Madden 12 is I would play our buddy Mitch and I would run the slip screen 100 times and I'd fucking torch him. So that's my main lasting memory.
I was a big make the fullback the starting running back guy and just barrel through people.
What a surprise. That surprises me 0%.
Marcel Reese was my favorite Madden player back in the day.
Marcel Reese, man, bring him. Hey, he might be coming back if these running backs do strike. We may see Marcel Reese starting for a team pretty soon. All right, we are going to finish out our fantasy football preview series with the NFC South. Honestly, look, there's going to be fantasy football content. There's going to be fantasy football content every week leading up until the season. I'll figure out what exact format that's going to take now that we're finishing up our divisional previews. But you guys can bank on plenty more of that. Before we get there, though, we do have to preview the NFC South. We'll start with the Atlanta Falcons, and look, we're going to start with the quarterback. All right, everybody, settle down. We'll get to the guy you're all waiting for. We do this every week. We go quarterback, running back, receiver, then tight end. Quarterback, Pat. Desmond Ridder. Can I just say also this division is a fucking cesspool for quarterbacks.
I was thinking,
it's
I'm
gross,
I was
man.
thinking is there's one good quarterback, and I don't know, I don't know why I was thinking oh yeah, Tom Brady, and it's oh fuck, wait a minute, no, everyone sucks.
You will be in leagues where there is not a single NFC South quarterback drafted. I can understand. I could see Derek Carr getting drafted as a backup for some people who want to have a backup quarterback. Maybe
they shouldn't.
I agree. You shouldn't. You'll see people take a stab at Bryce Young here and there, but most leagues, if they're smart, none of these quarterbacks will get drafted. And I think Desmond Ridder is kind of the epitome of that. QB 29 right now. Just too many unknowns, Pat. I mean, he's a third-round guy. He's taking over for Marcus Mariota. And all we know about him right now is that this is an extremely run-first offense, and it's a quarterback that we've seen nothing from. So, look, he's going to stay on your waiver wire, and if by some miracle he shows that he could be a fantasy contributor, you go get him. But that's really where we're at.
This is the year of, like, there's a shot. Well, I mean, I guess 3 is a shocking amount of guys that are just being handed the keys that have not done anything yet. Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell in Washington, and then Jordan Love, obviously, in Green Bay. So it's like, I just don't know what to expect from him. Specifically, like, he is someone that is not on my radar at all in a single quarterback league.
I'm not optimistic because I just don't think this was the Falcons' plan. I think if you went back a year ago and, asked them what they were trying to do. If you remember, the Falcons tried to trade for Deshaun Watson. That was their initial plan. And then they basically disgruntled Matt Ryan to the point where he demanded a trade and ended up in Indy. They had to pivot to Marcus Mariota. Desmond Ridder is like option 17. Like, and maybe he turns out to be good, but I can't even unequivocally say this is a guy the Falcons believe in. So I'm not really banking on him doing anything real life or fantasy wise this year. What I can't say that about is their run game, which is led by Bijan Robinson, currently the RB3 on Underdog. Crazy to me.
Tyler Algier. Got to talk about that.
We will. We've got Tyler Algier at RB47, which is also kind of crazy. I mean, I understand because of them drafting Bijan, but that we have a 1,000-yard receiver on the same team in the same situation, other than that they drafted a guy and now he's RB47. But look, that's what happens when a team spends a top 10 pick on a back. Bijan Robinson at RB3, Pat. Look, I've talked up Bijan plenty. I gave all the numbers and all the stats as to why, you should believe in rookie running backs when they are drafted this high. You don't need to see it to believe it. Like, they're probably going to at least be good their rookie year. I'm confident Bijan Robinson will be an RB1, that being a top 10 back.
Absolutely.
Being RB3 overall, people are falling in love a little too hard here.
Yeah, I mean, we're just gonna completely dox our league right now, but he is set to go number 2 overall in our league, possibly as the first running back off the board.
Yes.
Excuse me. And I like you said, there's a lot of things to like. The guy's the best prospect since Saquon Barkley, and arguably better. He's a great pass catcher, and Arthur Smith just loves to fucking run the ball. No disrespect to Tyler Algier, he could very well be a solid, good running back, but
right,
does not compare to Bijan Robinson. The fact that they could get Tyler Algier as a late-round rookie, 1,000 yards, the sky's the limit for this guy. But my question is, am I willing to take him over guys like Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor? I can't find myself. Some of them, I guess I would think about it. I'm glad that in our big league, I'm not going to have to.
Yeah, we won't have that choice.
But I find it difficult. I feel like that's really risky to chase that kind of upside in the first round. And I mean, again, I think the floor is decent too, just because of what we've seen in Atlanta and Arthur Smith in the past. But I am very hesitant to take him over some of those more established guys that you pretty much know what you're going to get.
And that's the thing, Pat, is like, chasing the numbers with Bijan, like, you're not going to sink your team by drafting Bijan Robinson, even call it number 3 overall. Let's say it's 3 backs off the board to start it out. You're not going to sink your team with that pick because, again, I do believe he's going to put up really good numbers. History has shown that he's likely going to. It's just that you can get guys with a similar floor and a higher ceiling before him. And you look at, in PPR leagues especially, Austin Eckler and Christian McCaffrey, absolutely. Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley if he doesn't hold out. Then you've got like a guy like Nick Chubb, I would take over him. He's just a little too high. I mean, I think if you bump him down to like RB6, 7, I'd be way more okay with it. And like that's where I wouldn't bat an eye if he was at that spot. But you look at the Falcons situation compared to some of these other backs situations. Again, we don't know if Desmond Ridder is going to be good, and he may not have to be good for this offense to move because it's so run heavy, but we don't know how high powered this offense is going to be, how many scoring opportunities there are going to be here. And Algier is going to eat in a little bit. Like he's a 1,000-yard guy, and this is a team that likes multiple running backs. It's just not, I don't see the ceiling like for RB3. I don't get it. I think he's an ideal guy if you're picking from spot 8, 9, 10 in your league, but he's not going to make it there. He's just not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because and also people will always chase the sexy picks. The next.
Yeah.
The next.
And he'll
big
be
thing.
fun to root for. He'll be so fun to own. But by the end of the year, he's not going to be mathematically your best choice.
Oh yeah, like I hope maybe in all the leagues I'm in, maybe I'll own him, but somewhere. But like if it's just a very serious league with a lot of money on the line, I am a little apprehensive over some of those other guys that we just talked about.
Yeah, the blood is just a little too rich with Bijan Robinson at this point. And Tyler Algier at RB47. Look, I don't think he's going to have consistent standalone value like a guy like Elijah Mitchell that we talked about, just because this is a team, again, I just don't know how many scoring opportunities they're going to have, and then you need Algier to vulture those scoring opportunities, because that's really going to be his ticket to fantasy relevance again this year. It's
elite handcuff as well. I'd argue
elite handcuff. You have to pick him.
He's a guy that is probably in the high-end RB2 conversation if something happens to Bijan Robinson. So, but again, so you're drafting him as a handcuff. So
you have to pick him if you have Bijan. Beyond that, it's not a guy I'm really in love with putting on my team unless I'm for some reason banking on a Bijan injury. Receiver-wise, we've got. Look, I put down Cordero Patterson here. He's RB62. There's been talk of moving him to receiver. I think Cordero Patterson's
think he's going to get cut.
Yeah, so here's the thing. There's a good chance he gets cut, and even if he doesn't, I think Cordero Patterson's little run here as a surprisingly fantasy-relevant player is coming to an end. I want to say he's 34, Pat. I don't want to get that wrong.
Yeah,
only 32. But, for a running back.
That's the same thing. If you're over 30 years old, it's basically the same thing.
Exactly. So he's 32, and I just think, I think there's probably a lot of merit to them if they are keeping him around to making him more of a receiver, because you just don't need him as your third string running back with Algier and Bijan. You might as well put him at receiver where they are pretty weak. They've got Drake London, they've got Mac Hollins, and then their wide receiver 3, Scotty Miller. Beyond Drake London, you don't have a ton of talent there. Mac Hollins had spike weeks last year with the Raiders. He looked good, but how much of that was a product of just Devontae Adams was being quintuple teamed, and somebody's got to catch the ball. So I think Drake London is the only real talent at receiver. But even him, Pat, I can't bring myself to target other players not associated with the run game in this offense. I'm not that into it.
I'll disagree. I'm into him. I dig him there.
Okay.
Because you look at the four starts Desmond Ridder made last year. London had 8 or more targets, and again, we're talking about the top receiver prospect, or one of the top receiver prospects from 2 years ago. Obviously, they're going to run the ball a fuck ton, but they're going to throw the ball some, because at least Desmond Ridder, it appears, can throw the ball, which at times we question whether or not Marcus Mariota could legitimately do that last year.
He did it from his back, if you remember, and then it got picked.
They're going to throw the ball some. I will say, obviously, we'll get into your boy in a second, but just in general, I would rather have Drake London than Kyle Pitts. I think Drake London will be the more prominent fantasy pass catcher in that offense, more so than Kyle Pitts.
All right, well, I guess we'll move on to the main event here, because it just transitions in
nicely. Drum roll, please.
I think the reason that I would also prefer Drake London to Kyle Pitts in terms of pass catching is, look, Drake London's going to be on the field a lot. Last year, Pat, the most baffling part of Kyle Pitts' usage was when he would come off the field. It seemed like it was in situations that were almost perfect for his skill set. And look, when I say that, I'm not even trying to get too specific with formations and coverage. I'm just saying when they were in the red zone and about to score and they didn't have Kyle Pitts on the field, it was baffling. It was very, very confusing. Michael Pruitt had the same number of touchdowns and red zone targets as Kyle Pitts did. And this all ties into... Look, this is, again, we'll say it a billion times. It's a run-first team. That's what Arthur Smith wants to emphasize. And Kyle Pitts was not blocking all that effectively last year. Shocker, he's basically a receiver. That's not really what he's meant to do. Which they should have known what
they were getting into. Using a top 10 pick on a tight end, you better know what you're getting into.
Why are you drafting this guy so high if you're not going to use him to his absolute strengths,
or if he doesn't fit your philosophy?
Exactly. And it's it wasn't like this was a holdover and a new, ownership coming in, or new GM and new coaching coming in, and he didn't fit there what they were trying to do. But here's where I'm at with Pitts, and here's what happened last year, okay? The reason I'm completely out on Kyle Pitts this year is because I see so much of the same questions. Falcons are run first. That's not going to change. It'll probably be even worse because they have Bijan Robinson. There was last year a thing I ignored, and that partially led to the downfall of my fantasy team and Kyle Pitts' fantasy production. Look, it's not all Kyle Pitts' fault. It's not. Marcus Mariota was terrible. I completely underestimated what the change would be from Matt Ryan to Marcus Mariota. I figured, relatively washed up Matt Ryan was able to get Pitts to 1,000 yards, which is almost broke a rookie tight end record held by Mike Ditka. I figured that was the floor, right, Pat? 1,000 yards could be the floor, and that's crazy. And he only scored one time. So you expect positive regression in the touchdown category to, 5, 6, 7 more. He's that elite of a player. That was the thinking. Now, you head into this year, and you might be thinking, look, I like Kyle Pitts now. Desmond Ridder, he can't be any worse than Marcus Mariota. Are we sure? You're probably, that's probably true.
I think the only thing was just that, there were games where it was clear that Arthur Smith just didn't even trust Mariota to throw the ball at all. Well, I believe they might have had a single-digit pass attempt game. I could be wrong there, but it was very low.
You're probably right.
With Ridder, he's throwing the ball 20-plus times a game. So at least, he is physically capable of doing it. The team has the confidence in him to do it. How well is he going to produce? We don't know. That's the thing. It's true. We don't know.
That's the thing. For how long is Ridder going to have that leash? Look, maybe Ridder is good. Maybe Ridder is enough of a replacement level quarterback that it doesn't tank this team. But I think ignoring the possibility that he is Mariota or even just, only a little bit better or just the same as what he was and what he provided to the rest of this offense, I think you're disregarding the realm of possibilities that come with this offense. Just because something changed does not mean it's going to be better. That was the mistake I made last year. I thought Mariota coming in would be at least as good as Matt Ryan for fantasy production, not necessarily real life. I know Mariota's never been a prolific quarterback, but that's just, I think you have to take into account every possibility for how this team is going to look. And there is a world where Desmond Ridder is not good, to put it quite simply.
Yeah, and unlike, I cited, the games with Ridder started for London, we didn't see it. Pitts was hurt. We did not see him out there with Desmond Ridder. So we don't even have that small sample size to go off of.
Exactly.
We have nothing to go off of here with Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, and look, the ceiling, I understand, is there. If you want to take this chance, feel free. We're coming off a year where Kyle Pitts underperformed so massively. I mean, he was on pace for 600 yards only before he got hurt. Team still run heavy, questionable quarterback. And then not only has Arthur Smith, Pat, not shown any public desire to use Kyle Pitts any differently than he did this past year.
He seems defiant.
Which was baffling usage to begin with. I mean, he was angry at even the concept of fantasy football when it was brought up to him. He brought in Jonnu Smith, who we brushed this off earlier in the offseason. Look, and you could brush it off now.
I still am.
Feel free. Here's my deal with Jonnu Smith. He disappeared with the Patriots, and I understand that. Jonnu Smith is a better blocker than Kyle Pitts is. He fits their run-heavy approach. And the last time Jonnu Smith was with Arthur Smith, he scored 8 touchdowns.
Yeah, he was really good
in Tennessee. So, I mean, look,
I know that deal for New England.
Right. So he was the star. I understand he was the starter in Tennessee, and that's the big elephant, for this being a different situation. You're going to get 8 touchdowns if you start maybe. But I just see a world, Pat, where Jonnu Smith has maybe more or the same number of touchdowns as Kyle Pitts just because of their weird little red zone packages. And I'm not saying he's going to take the yards. He's not going to out-target Kyle, nothing like that. But there's going to be enough of a vulturing from a guy like Jonnu Smith, who Arthur Smith has a personal relationship in and fits their scheme so well that it's going to frustrate you. Right. I mean, they look exactly alike. So it's going to frustrate you to a degree, even if Kyle Pitts looks like he could reach, a little more of his potential. I'm out on Kyle Pitts.
And to build off what you said, too, you're if you want to chase the upside, chase it. And I would say to that, draft somebody else. Draft the fallback. But you should not need to draft a fallback at tight end 5. Tight end 5 needs to be someone that you are confident, barring injury, will start for you every game in the year. That's my problem is more so the value. If we're talking about tight end 8 or 9, I might be a little more in. But at tight end 5, I'm completely out. And shout out FPS Gandhi. He dropped in the chat here. Mariota 8 for 13 against Cincinnati for 125 yards. So I was running the single digit completions. I was on the right track, but still to throw the ball 13 times in this NFL, in this pass heavy NFL, is hilarious. And you've got to think that they are going to have more confidence in Desmond Ridder to do that, to do more than that, because they didn't bring in much competition. They basically said this offseason, you're our guy. So it's got to be better. It's got to be better, but still, Kyle Pitts is just, I'd argue, the scariest player in fantasy football, regardless of position.
I would agree. And again, my worry, let's say you mentioned, the attempts and the completions for Desmond Ridder. Mariota started the year the same way. Like, Mariota had the leash, and then he proved he didn't deserve it, so they had to throw the ball less. And now, not only have they've drafted a running back. Like, now they have more of a reason to abandon the pass if it's not going to work. I mean, Arthur Smith is one stubborn motherfucker, if nothing else. Look, Mariota's pass attempts to start the year, week 1 against the Saints, he had 33, and then we'll go week by week here. 33 to 26 to 20 to 19, back up a little to 25, and then 14 and 13. And then he had a little more of a spike. I don't know if Mariota was just in fuck it mode at that point, and he was like, I'm going to just chuck it regardless. So there was a game plan change.
Under 15 pass attempts in back-to-back games is abysmal, and it's just a sheer lack of confidence in that. And again, like we said, I've said it like 20 times, they have to have more confidence in Desmond Ridder. There is no fucking way, especially in such a winnable division. I think they're going to win the division. In such a winnable division, to give a guy that you're not that confident in. So you've got to be confident in him, and you think that's going to have to boon Drake London and Kyle Pitts even just a little.
We'll see. Because who are we turning the keys over to here, Pat? It's a third-round quarterback who nobody would be shocked to see out of the league in 2 years. That's where we're at with Desmond Ridder.
I feel like that's where we're at with a lot of quarterbacks of that ilk.
It's just a huge question mark, and I'm not willing to pay up for tight end 5 with all hopes resting on the question mark quarterback, because everything else is the same or working against Kyle Pitts' favor. You've got potential vulturing in the red zone. You've got a more run heavy approach. It's not looking great for Pitts. Your hope is that the quarterback is more accurate and allowed to throw more, and it's just not. That's not enough of a ceiling to chase for me with Kyle Pitts. I'd rather take a guy like Dallas Goedert ranked right around him, or I'd rather just wait and get David Njoku or Pat Freiermuth or someone like that.
Exactly.
That's all it is. I will probably not own Kyle Pitts on any of my fantasy teams this year, much to the chagrin of all my followers who seem to think I'm in love with him. And they're like, you're going to take him come draft day. I'm like, guys, it's not like that I'm addicted to this upside. I've done the research. I don't fucking like the outlook. I don't want the guy. Yeah.
I think what you're saying is fair. I think everything you're saying is fair.
I'm good on Kyle Pitts, which means he will finish the year as tight end 1 and score 18 touchdowns. Okay, moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Pat. Speaking of
more like the Yuccaneers
division. Okay, you didn't run that one by me in the pre-production meeting. I would have nixed that one for strictly corniness.
My pay has been cut.
Your pay of 0.
My pay has been divided by 0.
Oh, God. We're going to fall into the abyss. All right, Baker Mayfield, quarterback 33. I didn't even put Kyle Trask on here because who cares? We don't know who's going to win this job yet. Right now, it seems like Baker.
It seems all indications that it's going to be Baker Mayfield, which is the right decision despite, what we've seen from him. He has at least shown that he he has been a competent NFL quarterback recently. Yeah, so that's the obvious move.
I'm hoping to see some of the Rams magic maybe come to life here for Baker this year. I would love to see if he could, pick up where he left off in a sense after he barely, had gotten off the plane and had to start that game, and then I think beat the Raiders.
Oh,
beat
yeah.
the Raiders, right?
Oh, yeah.
Couldn't remember which team it was vividly. For a second.
I think I was wearing this jersey at a bar, and I was getting clowned to death at the end of that game.
Yeah, so look, as a big Baker believer and supporter over the years, I hope he can put together something, but who knows? He's not on the fantasy radar. We know that much. Pat, something interesting that I'm kind of noticing here about all these Buccaneers players we have, none of these guys, based on their underdog ADPs, are projected fantasy starters outside of the flex position, because you've got Rachaad White even, who's RB25, which means he's not an RB1 or 2 in a 12-team league, and then you've got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, who are both beyond wide receiver 30. So we'll start with the running backs. So Rachaad White is actually a guy I really, really like. I feel like, and he's got his risks, obviously, but that's why he's going where he's going, which is as RB25. I feel like the running back dead zone here is a lot less dead this year than in years past.
Absolutely. I think that's just because, like, we've seen receivers and quarterbacks have just been, their value's gone up in the higher rounds and in the middle rounds too. So I agree completely.
Yeah, a guy like Rachaad White, I mean, again, look, you're going to have your risks when you're a running back who's going outside of the top 3 rounds in fantasy. We all understand this, but there's also the upside of, look, the only back behind him is Chase Edmonds, who could barely find productivity in an offense like Miami's, where, I mean,
they paid him a fair chunk too,
right,
and he still did nothing. They didn't want to use.
they shipped him off to Denver where he did nothing there either.
Broke his ankle or something. No.
Yeah. So I think Rachaad White is going to get the lion's share of carries on this team. He's a guy who has shown a desire and willingness to be more involved in the pass game as well. It's just a guy that I think is going to get enough touches, even on a potentially pretty bad team, to warrant consideration here as an RB2 or flex, assuming you've gone wide receiver heavy early.
I just think he's a better version of our boy James Conner we talked about last week. Similar situation.
Sure.
Probably going to be a bad team. Who knows, how many red zone opportunities they're going to get. But there's no competition. And again, this is a vote of confidence. They got rid of playoff Lenny, and they brought no one in. Chase Edmonds is no one. Sorry. He does not count 100%. As someone to compete. That is Rachaad White's backfield. And I think a lot of it is just going to come down to how good are they. Because if this turns into a competent offense, then Rachaad White will be the steal of the draft, I think. But that's a huge if. That's a huge if. But at the value, oh yeah, all day. Especially if you kind of punt the position. He's for that value. Those question marks are fine. Everyone at that point is going to have question marks once you get into flex territory. But I'll take those question marks for having Rachaad White at my flex or as a starting running back on a team that's very loaded elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, this quote-unquote running back dead zone that you usually find in, the 4th, 5th, 6th round of your drafts every year, it's got names like David Montgomery, Rachaad White, James Conner, who I don't like, but I understand the volume, whatever. Isaiah Pacheco, Alvin Kamara, James Cook. I feel like it's so much more loaded with guys who are going to have opportunity. And look, the two pieces of being a really good fantasy asset are talent and opportunity, right? Rachaad White is the kind of guy who we know he's going to have pretty good opportunity, and he might have the talent too. We know he's talented, but
I think he's got the talent. I think he's got it. I think
it's a matter of how much it's going to translate to the NFL level. Because if he's a truly uber talented guy with this opportunity, he's going to be an RB2, and there's no question, or a high end RB2. So that's what you're kind of betting on. He's going to have that opportunity. Is he going to be good enough to make it worth it beyond that? And I think there's a good chance he's as good of a, I don't want to call him a lottery ticket because that's not what he is. He's as good of a bet to make for your RB2 as anybody is in that range. I definitely like him, more than I found myself in a mock the other day drafting him over Alexander Madison, for example. He's just, I think, a better player. That offense is going to be worse, but he's a guy that I would prefer.
That's an interesting question. That's an interesting.
It's definitely a tough question. Yeah, I went back and forth. I thought that was interesting. That was where I settled when that ever menacing ESPN countdown clock was hitting. I was like, oh, who do I really? I was like,
it's sad that they don't have Matthew Berry to yell, "Hurry up!" anymore.
I hated that so much. Even when they did it, I was like, that was the one positive of him leaving ESPN and going to NBC.
Quick side note. I played slow pitch softball with Daniel Dopp from ESPN.
Oh, really?
Just the nicest fucking guy. You would, you sometimes you wonder are these people as cool as they seem, behind the scenes? And my God, I met Field Yates once too, same way. They got great guys. They got great guys at ESPN. Sorry, Matthew Berry, but
I'm sure he was good too.
Oh, I'm sure he's a great guy too. But these guys are proven. We know. But yeah, it's a complete side note. I don't know. Oh yeah, you said I mentioned Matthew Berry. Jeez. But yeah, but I guess to move on, one of the kind of the hotter guys this year on all these YouTube and TikToks is Chris Godwin, and honestly, I'm on board with it. I think, what is he, wide receiver 30 something here?
30.
Wide receiver 30
on the dot in Underdog.
I think that's crazy. Specifically because Baker Mayfield loves the slot receiver. Mm-hmm. You go back to his days in Cleveland when they were playing good ball, or good enough ball. He loves the slot receiver, and Chris Godwin, should he stay healthy, obviously that's the case with everyone, we could begin a situation where he's getting peppered. And again, obviously you've got Mike Evans. Rachaad White wants to be more involved in the passing game. Cade Otton, there's not a ton of competition. So I think we're in a world in a PPR thing where Chris Godwin will be far more than wide receiver 30 based on volume alone.
Sorry for the ESPN notification sound there, but appropriate given our conversation. Yeah, I think, Pat, you look at Chris Godwin and you compare him to Mike Evans. Godwin, there is so much more consistency there. Evans kind of backdoored his way to that whatever it's straight 1,000-yard season that he's been rocking for basically his whole career. 200 yards and 3 touchdowns in his final week, but other than that, he was not reliable or honestly good last year.
And that was with Tom Brady.
That was with Tom Brady. He had a good first month. I mean, in PPR leagues, first month of the season, he missed week 3, his first 4 games of the season, 18.1, 9.1, 30.3, and 12.1. As you went on, I mean, he had a stretch from week 9 on where this is 5 single-digit performances in full point PPR. 5 single-digit performances. That's when you're approaching and trying to get to the fantasy playoffs, and that's with Tom Brady, as you said. I think Godwin, his skill set just matches more what Baker Mayfield is going to be doing at this point in his career, which is, maybe not throwing up those jump balls, because Baker Mayfield's a few picks away from being benched. He's not really in a place to be playing fuck it ball. He's in a place to be throwing maybe these shorter to intermediate routes to a guy like Chris Godwin, who was, again, consistent last year. I'll pull up his numbers just to reference. I think it's double digits every single game. I mean, he had 6.5 points in week 1, where I believe he got hurt because then he missed week 2 and 3. From week 4 on, double-digit points, at least 10 points in every week except week 18 against the Falcons, where he had 9.5. So this is a guy that at wide receiver 30, I mean, that's a flex, or a wide receiver 2 if you have a bunch of running backs already and have taken a quarterback. Like, how are you going to argue that? Like, that's double-digit points. You're not going to be upset from a guy that is probably one of your last starters you're going to draft, and he's going to be giving you at least 10 a week.
Honestly, I think I overlooked him greatly in our sleeper value draft last week. I think we both overlooked him greatly. But yeah, I think the floor is just so much higher than Mike Evans, and he's still got a good ceiling, because obviously if you're catching 8 passes a game, you're probably gonna do something with it. And just from, again, garbage time as well, checkdowns. I think it's just a good situation for a good player. And it's going to result in him just smashing his ADP.
Yeah, I think people are staying away from this offense just because it's Baker and there's so many question marks, and it's kind of gross, and I get it. But just look, there's always going to be diamonds in the rough. And I think with Evans kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say deteriorating, but with Godwin being the more consistent player at this point in his career, I think there's definitely some value to be had there. Just to finish out the Bucs, we've got Cade Otton. He's tight end 36. I mean, I have to say there is a little value there as a starting tight end, as tight end 36. Because when you bring in a new quarterback like they are with Baker Mayfield, you don't know who he's exactly going to mesh with. And sometimes players just fall in love and have chemistry with a certain player. Maybe that's Cade Otton. It's a dart throw. He's tight end 36. We acknowledge this, but it's somebody to keep in mind that's probably too low, because he's a starter, and he's going to be getting a lot of red zone looks when they get there, I would think. Like
we mentioned, outside of Godwin and Evans, let's see Bucs depth chart. Let's see who they've even got behind them. Russell Gage is a listed starter, and Trey Palmer, Devin Tompkins. I've heard of David Moore. Is that the Seattle David Moore? But still, besides that, Russell Gage is a viable NFL receiver, but there's not a ton of competition outside of that big 2. So Cade Otton's in a position where he's definitely higher than tight end 36, definitely, but still not a guy that you're. A guy that's probably going to go undrafted in most leagues still.
A name that you can keep an eye on, though. Cade Otton was actually kind of the yin to my Kyle Pitts Yang last year. I was starting him on the wrong weeks, but I owned them both once I realized that Pitts wasn't a consistent
guy. The one league I had Kyle Pitts in it. It was him and Cade Otton, and also fellow NFC South tight end Taysom Hill. So it was just I came in last place in that league, just in case you were wondering.
I do really like the talent with Cade Otton. It's just a matter of how. We're starting to get into a few too many mouths to feed from Baker Mayfield, but it's a guy to keep an eye on. You never know.
Especially since those two, Godwin and Evans, are also a bit injury prone.
Right.
He could find himself as the number 2 option at some point.
And but you could easily find him as the number 1 red zone option quickly if Mike Evans were to go down.
Absolutely.
All right, New Orleans Saints, Pat. You mentioned Taysom Hill. Let's talk about him. Derek Carr, QB19, the highest drafted quarterback out of this division, but again, still not a guy you're relying on. He's a guy that bye-week fill-in. That's what he was his entire time on the Raiders. I think he's got some good weapons to play with here in New Orleans, but he's not a guy that I'm expecting, a big jump from or anything like that, to where I want to start him or I'm going to project big things for him.
Exactly. I mean, obviously he's a starter in a 2 QB league, or a super flex league maybe even, but I think he does have a bit of the upside, the fact that he can throw a deep ball. He can, he's got a bit of a higher ceiling there, but he is nothing more than a bye-week fill-in in your standard 1 quarterback league.
Absolutely.
Despite how much I like the guy. Sorry, Derek.
Agreed. I think vastly the most interesting part of this offense is the backfield right now.
Interesting and it's bad.
Alvin Kamara, RB30, Jamal Williams, RB43, Kendry Miller, RB45. We don't know, again, we talked about Kamara last week with, him settling for the misdemeanor charge or whatever it was. We don't know exactly what his fate is going to be as far as the suspension goes. What I know is that no matter how it falls, Pat, you'll be able to find value in any player and situation if you get him at the right time. I'm just not excited to own any of these guys because, what's the most likely situation? Let's take the medium situation, which is Kamara gets suspended for 4 games, whatever. Talked about that last week too. Then you've got rookie Kendry Miller. You don't know how much he's going to adjust to the NFL quickly and how much work he's going to get. You've got Jamal Williams, who no matter what happens with Kendry Miller, Jamal's going to take touchdowns. We know that.
Might be all he does.
Exactly. And then if Kamara doesn't get suspended, Jamal's going to take touchdowns from Kamara. I just find it hard to get excited about this backfield, even with a guy like Alvin Kamara, such a brand name being an RB30. It's crazy, but it's not exciting.
I think in your little scenario, say Kamara does get suspended, you're looking at Jamal Williams as more of the lead back, early down, short distance goal line, with Miller spelling him, and then when Kamara comes back, it's just gonna be a fucking mess.
Yeah.
And I get why they brought in those guys, knowing what could have happened with Kamara, and also we've mentioned Kamara was not good last year. He had that 3-touchdown game against the Raiders, God damn it, that completely booned his end-of-year stats. And it was a bit of a misrepresentation because he was so frustrating. And, again, I think we're forgetting one of the key pieces in this, and it's Taysom Hill.
I know, man. I know. He's so hard to predict year to year what his usage is going to be because last year he did essentially turn into a running back. But was that by design or by necessity? Now they bring in Jamal Williams, maybe he doesn't see more than a handful of snaps at running back, but knowing how he's been used,
I don't think so. I'm not confident in that at all. Dennis Allen has inherited Taysom Hill the same way that Sean Payton did. And I guess talking about Hill now too, in a position where tight end is so touchdown dependent, who cares what kind of touchdown it is? Taysom Hill is one best ball, a great late round best ball pick.
Yeah.
And even in standard redraft leagues, he's a great late flyer because you just never know what's going to happen. If you're in a position where the guy you drafted is kind of shit in the bed and you're piecing it together from week to week, why not throw it into a guy like Taysom Hill? Granted, not sure how much he's going to factor into the passing game. Probably not at all, as it's been. But I think he does. I hate that he has fantasy value, but especially as a tight end, he's got fantasy value, and I think he hurts an already very complicated backfield that, for the most part, I am completely out on. Kendry Miller in Dynasty, you want to take any of those 3 guys in best ball, be my guest. But for your regular redraft league, I just can't see a scenario where that happens.
No, I'm not really interested in the running backs here unless something changes. But yeah, Pat, just to touch on Taysom Hill, I can't call him a cheat code for the tight end position, but he's definitely a glitch with the tight end position because this dude popped, a random 34-point game in PPR out of nowhere week 5 against the Seahawks where he scored 3 touchdowns. He had weeks of 10, 13. He had, to end the season last year, he was actually double digits in 4 out of his final 5 games. The only one he wasn't was that final week against Carolina where he had 3.5. Why is he still listed as a tight end, Pat? He was targeted 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He was targeted 13 times all year, and he wasn't hurt.
I think so much of it is, at least for these leagues, it's the fact that technically he is a tight end on their roster. And I think that's why it happens. But no, he's not a tight end at all. But it's not to the point, like I said, I wonder if we're going to enter a situation where we're going to have a problem where he ends up starting at quarterback some week. And guys are basically starting quarterback in their tight end spot. But what do you do? Do you just make him a universal flex? Put him anywhere?
I think you make him a running back. I don't. And yes, if you make him a running back, he becomes useless and unpredictable. But that's what he should be. I think the only reason he's on radars is because he puts up these points at a position that, especially last year, was so desolate and unpredictable. It was worth it at times to risk maybe a 0 because you were potentially getting 0 from whoever the fuck else you were trying to start.
Exactly.
So
if he was not a tight end, we wouldn't be talking about him.
He gets deployed and puts up points like he's fucking Matt Asiata, Pat. And that's why he needs to be listed as a running back. Like, I don't understand. Guy gets 13 targets all year as a borderline full-time player. I mean, how many? He had, I think, 96 carries. Like, that's a running back. That's a running back. So I don't know. He needs to be nerfed because for this reason, he's tight end 19 on Underdog, Pat. Juwan Johnson, who's actually a good tight end, is tight end 21.
Yeah.
Because he's an actual tight end.
And I took Juwan Johnson in our sleeper draft last week. And obviously, like, I'm not concerned about Taysom Hill because Taysom Hill, like you said, 13 targets or 13 catches, whatever? That's
13
nothing.
targets.
13
targets.
That's nothing. And, we talked about Juwan Johnson, how obviously a red zone beast, but he's more than that. And Derek Carr likes his tight ends. He basically gave Darren Waller a career.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good situation for Johnson. I think him being 21 is a little nuts. Like, I think he's more of a high-end tight end, too. He certainly was last year.
Yeah, I think people are a little spooked. I mean, we talked about Foster Moreau last week. I think they're a little spooked by that signing because it's like, okay, this guy's got a history with Carr, and then you've got Taysom Hill. But, like, as we just talked about, Taysom Hill's not a tight end. So, like,
and
that
Foster
doesn't
Moreau,
factor in.
just like, again, as much as I love the guy, as much of an inspiration he is now, he's just not great. Like, he's a backup. He's the definition of a backup tight end. If Johnson gets hurt, he'll be the lead tight end, and he may have some value those weeks, but I'm not concerned about him taking real value away from Johnson.
I agree. As we skipped over the receivers here, we'll backtrack a little bit. So we've got Chris Olave, wide receiver 12, Michael Thomas, wide receiver 47, and then one of our favorite, sleepers, potential breakout guys, Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver 72.
Show those hands, Rashid.
I think all of these guys are actually ranked in a place where I would draft all of them. I mean, am I going to want to come out of a draft with 3 Saints wide receivers? No, probably not the same one. But these are guys. Look, Chris Olave as wide receiver 12 is somebody that I firmly believe is going to take that next step this year. He was productive last year. These Ohio State wide receivers have this track record of taking those steps and becoming good players. And Derek Carr needs a top weapon, and I don't necessarily think that's going to be Michael Thomas. But look, with Michael Thomas, maybe it is. And he's wide receiver 47. Yeah. So you've got a lot of value to be had there too. And then Shaheed is free. He's free in your draft.
Yeah. I'm going to give 2 scorching hot takes. I don't love the hot takes here, but I'm going to give 2 scorching takes. I think Chris Olave will finish the year with more fantasy points than Garrett Wilson. I would draft Chris Olave over Garrett Wilson.
Wow.
If we are talking. And also, Michael Thomas is a waste of a draft pick.
Really?
Even at wide receiver 47, I am not wasting my time on Michael Thomas. But again, similar to Hopkins, obviously to a much lesser extent, guys are going to be like, ooh, Michael Thomas, and they're going to pick him. That might be why his ADP is where it is right now. But going back to Olave, we've seen time and time again that Carr links up with a guy, and it is great. Obviously, with Devontae Adams, and like I said too, Carr can throw the deep ball. And Olave is probably going to be one of the guys that benefits from that. And he is by far the most talented guy in a very crowded field of weapons. But I can easily see him becoming Derek Carr's Devontae Adams. In an offense where he will probably have the most defined role, considering Shaheed's a bit more of a gadget speed guy, and Michael Thomas is just a bag of bones at this point in his career. Like, this guy might not be on the field by week 2.
I know.
So, that's what I'm saying. Like, he has a clear path to being the alpha in that offense.
He does have a clear path, and I think he'll be the alpha regardless of Michael Thomas. I'm hesitant to write off Michael Thomas only because of what he did in the 2.5 games he played last year. PPR 22.7, 18.5, and then 9.9 in a game that I don't believe he finished. Like, I know he hasn't had a real season since 2019. And it's like, how long are we going to chase this dragon for? But I also can't sit up here and tell you guys, in being injury prone isn't a real thing when it relates to running backs. And write off a guy like Michael Thomas. He's not a guy that I'm banking on getting back to that point, but at wide receiver 47, it's like, I mean, if he does.
Oh, I mean, I guess. I guess. At that point, you're taking
I respect
anybody.
Your take, though. I understand.
But I just cannot see him being a factor with the age, with the injury. And I think the fact that, too, he had those games with Jameis Winston, I believe, last year. I think this offense is going to be a bit more dynamic with Derek Carr at the helm than it was with Jameis or than it was with Andy Dalton later in the year. And I just don't know if Michael Thomas is really going to factor into that as much as he might have with those lesser quarterbacks.
to clarify, it's not that injury prone is not a thing. I mean, look, compensation injuries are a thing. If you've banged up certain parts of your body and then you're more prone to hurt them again later. Some guys just may not take care of their bodies as well as they should. I mean, that's how Tom Brady lasted so long forever, is because he was very healthy. Yes, he was also at the position that, gets protected more.
And they also made rules to protect specifically him, but
right. But it's like, still, you don't get to that point if you're not taking care of your body. And that's something that even Christian McCaffrey, a guy who had that tag of being injury prone, made sure, in the off seasons where he was injured, to try and figure out ways to make himself more durable. Michael Thomas may just be a guy that is just going to fade away. I mean, again, 2019, Pat, it's been 4 years since that record-breaking year.
That's the thing, is that I think that that's a long fucking time. It's just crazy. In general, especially football, in the fact that it's been so long has been because of injuries is what's kind of kept him out of our mind. And he is completely out of my mind. Like I said, you won't catch me drafting Michael Thomas anywhere. And like I said, I welcome people to see that name brand and take him way earlier than he should go.
Fall in love with the names, people. Let us get the guys that have yet to break out or who are actual statistical contributors. Final team in this division, Pat, the Carolina Panthers. You got Bryce Young, QB 20. I was tabbed over to our show sheet when you did that, so I didn't know it was coming. That was very aggressive. Okay, Bryce Young at QB 25 is a guy, just complete dart throw again. Rookie quarterback. Maybe he translates, maybe he doesn't, but I just don't think the rushing upside is going to be there to make a rookie quarterback. It's hard enough as a rookie quarterback to adjust to life in the NFL and then become a statistical contributor. Not having the rushing floor makes you borderline impossible to trust in fantasy football. Maybe we're having a different conversation in the second half of the season, Pat, and Bryce Young is starting to put together a couple good games. But to start the year, it's probably going to be rough for Bryce. That's just
and again, he's a guy that will probably get drafted just because first overall pick, yada yada yada. Right. But again, not to say that he's I just don't see it this year. And
no.
That's basically the whole offense. That's part of the thing. Is I just don't know how good this offense is going to be all around. I do like Miles Sanders though as a very smooth transition. I like him a little bit.
The rest of this offense is a bunch of guys, again, Miles Sanders being slightly overqualified for this analogy, but I described it as a bunch of guys you could get off your fantasy football waivers, basically. It's like they formed a completely new team out of these guys whose names but not necessarily because they were great.
I will say that's a bit of Adam Thielen slander there. He's a little bit more than that.
Not last year, not at the end of last year. I mean, he was targeted a bunch last year, but he was a guy who I believe was fairly droppable toward the end of the season.
I mean, but he's done more than that in his career.
Yeah, in his career he has.
The other guys are just
DJ Chark's had years too. I mean, DJ Chark's had his. Well,
more so.
Hayden Hurst had like a year, I think. So it's a mishmash of weird names.
That said, I don't like any of their pass catchers. No. Someone's gonna emerge. I don't know, and I'm not gonna try and find out. Maybe I'll try and find out on the waiver wire week 2 or 3. But in terms of preseason and drafts, I do not care to find out who is going to be the number 1 target for Bryce Young. Because who knows? As a rookie, you have no idea who. Honestly, if I had to draft any of them, it would probably be Thielen or Hurts. Because of how established they are and the fact that they're more check down guys. They're more safety valve kind of guys. And obviously, again, with the tight end position, Hurst is a guy who I believe I called him Hurts the last time I brought his name up. Hayden Hurst.
I knew what you meant. I assumed Jalen Hurts didn't
I don't know why.
Tight end.
Hayden Hurts, his long lost cousin.
Right. They look the same.
Obviously, at the tight end position, any kind of possibility like that is. But again, I'm not drafting him. Thielen, again, even when you're throwing darts, there are way more inspired darts to throw than Adam Thielen.
Yeah, Adam Thielen's a guy who I think is going to help Bryce Young monumentally in terms of real life football. I mean, he's a guy he's gonna be in the right spots. He's gonna just be a receiver that Bryce Young can trust.
Sneaky, athletic, hardest working guy.
Yeah, I mean, lunch pail guy, first one in, last one to leave, all that. But he's also older, so like fantasy wise, I can't recommend the guy. And yeah, Pat, this team, much like the Giants a couple weeks ago, I actually put down a bunch of receiver names because it's impossible to know who's going to emerge. You've got DJ Chark, Adam Thielen, and then Terrace Marshall, who's, I guess a vet now, but to a much lesser extent than Chark and Thielen are. Terrace Marshall's a guy who we've hoped would break out. I mean, he's kind of the third long-lost stepbrother out of that LSU
last
team.
Year.
He did with, I believe it was PJ Walker, most of them.
I think so.
And then you've got Jonathan Mingo, who's a second-round rookie from Ole Miss, and then you've got Laviska Shenault, who everyone still swears is going to be Percy Harvin or whatever he's supposed to be.
Yeah, he's going to be Percy Harvin for the last 5 years of Percy Harvin's career.
Or he just didn't exist and was hurt and on whatever. You don't know who Bryce Young is going to feed more, who he's going to be comfortable with, and you got Hayden Hurst in that equation as well. So I think it's too hard to... Again, you're taking a dart throw from a crowded wide receiver room on an offense that we don't know is going to be good. I really believe in what the Panthers are doing, what they've put together, team-wise, coach-wise, all that, top down. But I heard this quote recently, and I thought it summed it up perfectly. You have to get good before you can get great. And I think it's going to be a gradual step process for the Panthers where the step that they take this year is not going to be conducive to a lot of fantasy success. Somebody will pop up in that receiver room. It's just so hard to predict that it's not really worth it. There's much more, easier to predict situations or where you give yourself better odds to get a guy who's going to be a volume pass catcher on his team than trying to figure out who the fuck it's going to be on the Panthers.
Yeah. And I mean, we kind of glossed over him, but just to touch on Miles Sanders a bit, because obviously I do think he is the most worthwhile guy by a lot in this offense. We saw last year, obviously, though, different regime. We saw Deontay Foreman play really well last year, and we saw Chuba Hubbard have some solid weeks. And Miles Sanders is a solid player, and they paid him decent money. He's going to have the volume, but again, similar to Rachaad White, it's like, is the situation going to lead to production? And I just don't know. But again, I just dropped three. I just knocked over three things off my desk by talking with my hands. I'm not even Italian. But yeah, again, it's just a question of. But again, at RB20, very fair. He's a low-end RB2, high-end flex kind of guy. And again, if you're drafting in that sort of dead zone, Miles Sanders is a fine guy. But again, I'm not super inspired by his ceiling.
No, I'm not either. Miles Sanders is a guy that needed kind of one of the best offenses in the NFL last year to end up being productive. And look, the drop in whatever ADP and ranking, he's RB20. He finished, I think it was RB15 in full point PPR, and then in standard it was like RB10. So the drop off, does factor in the team he went to, but there's just other backs around him I like better. And Miles Sanders, he also hates fantasy football, and that makes me not like him either. He's one of those guys that just has a very negative
But at least he can't be getting repeatedly cucked by Boston Scott and Jordan Howard for touchdowns here. Maybe he'll get a shot here. We know Frank Reich does like to have a balanced attack. So, I mean, but again, are they going to be good enough to be in a scoring position a lot to really make him viable? I don't know.
He'll be getting cucked by Raheem Blackshear this year instead.
What was that guy's name? Fozzie Whitaker's coming back.
Fozzie Whitaker. Oh, my boy. All right, Pat, this podcast has gone a tad long. So I'm going to say this. We were going to do a draft of all of our biggest fantasy football busts. I'm going to just say this. Let's narrow it down to one guy each and just figure, because people ask me all the time who I think is going to be the biggest bust. I mean, I have a whole series on it on TikTok every year. And I always say it's really hard to predict who's going to be the... I am. I love busting. I always say it's really hard to predict who's going to be the biggest bust because you consider players massive busts because you didn't see it coming. So to try and see it coming almost negates it. But I think I can try and narrow it. Find one guy who I really think is just vastly overrated.
I've got one guy in particular who would have been my first pick as well.
Hit me with it.
And again, I think another thing too about bust is with sleepers and bust, it's all about ADP. Yes. Guys can always be sleepers based on where they're going, or, guys can be bust based on where they're going. And as much as it hurts me to say this guy's going in the late first round. And the fact that people are taking Devontae Adams in that area just blows my mind, as much as I hate to see it. Again, granted, Derek Carr, we're not talking about Derek Carr like some superstar, but he's such a different quarterback from Jimmy G in terms of the deep threat, the big playmaking. He'll get the volume with Jimmy G, but I don't see him getting these huge explosive plays. And to be going in the first round like that, taking him over some of these established running backs, I cannot do it.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking him over some established running backs, and these ESPN PPR rankings I have in front of me have Devontae as the wide receiver 5 ahead of Stephon Diggs,
unbelievable.
CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, guys who, are definitely don't have the pedigree that I guess Diggs does, but don't really have the pedigree Adams does over the course of a career, but the situation kind of undeniably, a lot of those guys have slightly better situation. I'm not a biggest Lamb guy, but other guys behind
I hope
him.
to God I'm wrong. I'll say that.
Yeah,
I'd love to be I'd love to be on a getting flamed compilation about being wrong about this at the end of the year, but the red flags are there. So I guess it's not a bust because I guess I'm seeing it coming, but I think the red flags are there for me.
I'm going to regret this one. I can just tell because it's a guy who has shown no signs of slowing down. In fact, last year had probably a career year in a lot of metrics. But I'm going to go with Derrick Henry.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going with.
Derrick Henry is the one guy among this top tier of running backs that, look, I don't even think we told the people, Pat, that our draft picks were confirmed. In our league, I'm going to be picking from the 7 slot. Pat's going to be picking from the 12 in our main league this year.
12-team league.
Yes, 12-team league. Derrick Henry is the one guy that I'm not even looking at. And I understand that's maybe an oversight, but the guys he's ranked around are so much younger, have similar potential, workload projections. I know Derrick Henry's the guy who pushed for 400 carries recently, but he's a guy that, again, it's back on I'd rather be 1 year early off the boat than I am a year late. And he's a guy... Yeah. He's getting old. What is his age? Because this was is he 30?
He's like 20.
Or he's going to be. He's 29. 29.
Yeah.
And yes, 29 years old. So you are at the back end of where running backs are usually, finish up being truly productive. And everyone's saying they don't know what the rules are for a guy that's built like Henry because he is built differently, quite literally, than any running back we've seen.
Granted, he's only had one severe injury, and he bounced back really nicely from it too.
Well, yeah,
and at age 28, injury, coming off a broken foot, that's remarkable. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, so I understand all of that. It's just that when I look at the guys that I could get as my RB1, like I would so much rather have Nick Chubb, Tony Pollard. Maybe not Breece Hall as an RB1, but I'd be more excited to own Breece Hall than I would be Derrick Henry.
I'll draw the line on Breece Hall there, but definitely
I wouldn't
Chubb
draft
and Pollard
him over Henry. I wouldn't draft Hall over Henry. Don't get me wrong, but would I prefer to draft maybe a receiver over Henry and then get Hall later on versus getting Henry and then a receiver in the second? Yes. So he's just a guy, and I say I'm going to regret it because he could 100% have another 1,700 yard, 18 touchdown year in him. Absolutely. But if I have to sit here and look at a guy who just kind of sticks out to me like a sore thumb that I personally just don't want for those concerns, I don't think the Titans are going to be very good. He's getting older. That's where I'm at. I don't want Derrick Henry in comparison to some of these other guys. I think the mileage has to catch up with him eventually, and he has more mileage than any back in the league right now. So
honorable mention: Dameon Pierce, Deebo Samuel.
Fair. I'm okay with those. Okay. We will finish out with our viewer questions. With reports of Belichick's seat being warm, what does he need to do to stay safe? This question actually coming from somebody I actually know, named Mike, Tactical Mech. What does he have to do to stay safe? I don't know if I want to say make the playoffs, Pat, because this division is so loaded.
And the conference.
With at least solid teams. I mean, the AFC is loaded. I'm going to say... I don't think he gets fired if he gets 10 wins. I don't think he gets fired. I think they'll be
first of all, I don't think he gets
building.
Fired at all. I think he retires.
Fair.
Retires, quote unquote.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. If it were to come to that, yeah, yes. Maybe an amicable split. But I think 10 wins would be enough that you can build up. I mean, what did they do last year? Was it 8 wins, 8 and 9? Yes, they finished 8 and 9. They were 10 and 7 the year prior. So. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they want to exceed 10 and 7 now that they have an offensive coordinator who knows what the fuck he's doing, and they can kind of go back to the point that they thought they'd be at 2 years ago. I think double-digit wins keeps him in the seat if he wants to be in the seat. I'll say that.
I don't. It's hard to put a number just because I just can't envision it with all the history he's had there and all he's done. The same thing like Greg Popovich and San Antonio Spurs. Like I just can't imagine them being like, "Hey, get the hell out of here." But at the end of the day, you can't live in the past. And those Patriots Super Bowls are getting further and further in the past. And they've been pretty mediocre to okay in the last few years. And, I mean, I guess you can't live in the past there, but still, I think it's more so like I'm kind of just caught off guard by the question is just because I just can't see it happening.
Yeah, it would be surprising. Truthfully, my first reaction when I saw the question was, what are you talking about? He's not in the hot seat. And then actually the same day today, I started to see, little rumors of potentially him being on the hot seat this year. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that was coming from a place of
Promote Steve.
somewhat legitimate. No, God, not Steve. Yeah, I think 10 wins would keep him safe. I think, honestly, even 9, I think they could get over. It's not like they're going to be kicking him out the door. This is such a long stretch of success, and as much as people want to say it was, all Brady because the records now correlate to it being Brady, all I say to you is that he's not going to have the same, record with the greatest of all time quarterback as he does with Cam Newton and Mac Jones, who's a guy that we don't really know if he's all that good yet. So the sample size of non-Brady Patriots is so small still that I'm not willing to blame it on Bill. I think if anything, maybe, if they were kind of mediocre this year or bad, they just move on from Mac. But I think that how the defense performs will tell me a lot this year, because that's kind of what Belichick always has his fingers all over, and that's what he drafted to be good this year with Christian Gonzalez. That'll tell us a lot. But I think 10 wins keeps him safe. 9 probably also keeps him safe. Just got to avoid a losing season and then figure out what the
I think it also depends how it happens too. If they're just some basically deceased offensive team, then yeah. But if they fight solid and just frankly aren't as good as some of these other teams, then probably a little more leeway.
Yeah, I would agree. And then our final question, who do you think leads the Bills and Eagles running back rooms, and who's your preference? So obviously we've talked about these teams in the past in our fantasy shows segments of the past couple months. I don't think we've ever really said, for the Bills at least, who our preference was between James Cook and Damian Harris. I prefer James Cook. I think Harris has too low of a ceiling with Josh Allen.
Yeah.
Like, even if they do reduce Josh Allen's rushing volume, like they've apparently said they want to, we'll see if that actually materializes, because he seems like a guy who's going to take that into his own hands.
Big time.
Even if they do that, it's not going to happen in the red zone. Josh Allen is a big body, and he's going to force the ball in, and that's kind of what Damian Harris does. So I don't see the use for Damian Harris in fantasy. He'll be a good guy between the 20s, for snaps. In real football, but not for fantasy. James Cook is a guy that I could see being dynamic enough to warrant a spot on your team. He could warrant a spot on your flex, or maybe even ascend to RB2 status if things break right. With the Eagles, definitely more of a question between DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny, but again, we've talked about the range of outcomes for Penny. He could be
cut,
a high-end RB2 or cut. And it's like they really are all within the realm of possibility. I prefer DeAndre Swift because, again, just dynamic player who they're going to get into good situations because it's the Eagles. I think he's going to be a guy that will perform better in your flex, at least in PPR leagues, more consistently than Penny will.
Yeah, and again, the range of outcomes is Penny. We have not seen Penny stay healthy for an extended period of time. But just the fact, too, that, not only is Swift going to be the pass-catching back, he's going to get some carries as well. Mm-hmm. And, if Penny gets hurt, we're talking about a 3-down back. So yeah. I just think basically not banking on an injury because you don't want to predict injury, but just with that is a stronger possibility in other situations. I've got to go Swift there. And same thing, same deal with Cook. Just the more taking the more dynamic players, especially since Damian Harris is just kind of meh. Like I've just never thought too much of him. Good short distance back, but Cook was a guy they drafted with decent capital that they phased into the offense a lot more last year. So, yeah.
2 teams with really good running quarterbacks. Shocker, we're picking the guys that aren't the pure runners. That's kind of where we're at. Guys that are just going to be getting into more dynamic situations where they can score. That'll do it for this week, guys. Thank you for tuning in for our my Kyle Pitts rant, for our take on the running back situation, D-Hop to the Titans. We will be back next week. Again, I'll figure out exactly what form of our fantasy football research or our fantasy football takes it's going to come to air next week. I don't know yet, but I know I want to talk more about fantasy football, and I plan to do so. I know Pat is the same way. So expect more of that, and specifics to come. But thank you guys for watching this week. For Pat Gustafson, I'm Brandon Carney, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.